Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future.
Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute's virtual event series. To fulfill President Reagan's mission of making the Reagan Library a dynamic intellectual forum, our Center for Public Affairs programming offers lectures and forums presenting perspectives on important public policy issues of the day. Each year, we bring you 20 to 30 events from politicians, authors, members of the media, business and military leaders, and more. Since the March 2020 closure of many businesses across our great country, the Reagan Foundation is now bringing its events online to ensure that we are still delivering world-class content, even if you can't get to our hilltop to watch it in person. In this week's Center for Public Affairs virtual event, we bring you Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz is currently serving his second term in the U.S. House of Representatives. He is a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the House Judiciary Committee. His work in Congress focuses on national security, veterans affairs, and adherence to constitutional principles. During today's conversation, Congressman Gaetz discusses his new book, Firebrand, a book he is quoted as saying is your invitation to the front lines of our fight. Join me with ideas, energy, images, and stories. And this is not my chronological diary. You can watch me on television for that. This is how we prevail with joy, and exactly how an exciting president is leading the way against all odds. We now invite you to enjoy our virtual program, coming to you from our Air Force One Pavilion Leadership Academy Oval Office, with Congressman Matt Gaetz and Reagan Foundation and Institute Executive Director John Highbush.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, welcome to the Reagan Library. I wish we had you here and not socially distanced as you are on the different coast, but what a terrific book. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a joy writing it, and it's particularly a joy to participate in, I think, a vibrant movement in our politics today. You know, whether one is on the political right or on the political left, what we see is a lot of energy and passion and enthusiasm, and I was glad to reflect on my perspective.
Well, you know, Congressman, I don't know, I think I read in the book that you love sports, you like baseball and you love sport. When I was a kid, I was into baseball a lot, and there was a book that came out. Maybe you've even read it or know it. It was by a pitcher for the Yankees, and his name was Jim Bouton, and the book was called Ball 4. I don't know if you're familiar with it. If you don't mind, I just want to read you an excerpt, because when I saw this, it reminded me so much of him and the book that you've written. And in it says, the book was a frank insider's look at professional sports teams, covering the off-the-field side of baseball life, including petty jealousies, obscene jokes, drunken tomcatting of the players, routine drug use, including by Bouton himself. Upon its publication, baseball commissioner Bowie Kuhn called Ball 4 detrimental to baseball and tried to force Bouton to sign a statement saying everything was fictional, and Bouton refused. When I read your book, Congressman, I thought, you know, this is so refreshing. Here's a member of Congress who puts himself out there and writes the truth in what he's actually seen, rather than the usual stuff that we see. So really, there's a fearlessness and a courage in you that I don't think we see very often, especially with younger members like yourself.
Well, thank you for that. I lay bare the experiences that I've had in Congress, and frankly, Washington remains a deeply corrupt place where people have to pay for committee assignments, for leadership opportunities, to create a sense of upward mobility within the institution. And while I have great reverence for public service as a profession, my father was a public servant, my grandfather was a public servant, I do believe that it is noble to choose to serve your neighbors and your community. I fear that the noblest profession is bearing a striking resemblance to the oldest profession, the way more and more politicians are exchanging money for favors. And it's why I'm the only Republican in the Congress now who has sworn off donations from all federal political action committees. I don't know how a member of Congress could take money from PACs and then tell their constituents that there aren't strings attached. Of course there are, and far too many in the Congress, I think, hand their calendar off to the lobbyists on K Street, and they hand their voting card to the leadership. and they're just sort of along for the ride. And I believe that President Trump is so different in his approach to Washington that he actually creates some oxygen and creates some space for non-traditional members like myself to choose a different way to serve. And for me, that's meant a lot of commentary in the media. It's meant a lot of work in the digital space, but maybe not so much of the normal glad handing and elbow rubbing that you see from a different generation in Washington.
Yeah, sure. Have you ever had any comparisons made to you, Congressman, of you're kind of like Newt Gingrich was in his backbencher days,
I get Leonardo DiCaprio more than Newt Gingrich as far as comparisons, but no, I mean, I think that Newt did bring a certain vigor to the place, a certain effort to reform some of the practices that really lean into the pay-for-play corrosive elements of Washington. When you write a tell-all about Congress, you're usually not still in Congress. That's what's a little different about my book, is that I'm still there. These people are still my colleagues. But I think that to address the generational challenges that we face, and whether you're on the right or on the left, I do think that issues like immigration, how we deal with digital platforms, the environment and climate change, these are generational challenges, and it will require a bit of a political realignment to solve them. I don't think that retreating to our corners, Republican versus Democrat, is all that productive. It's why I even write in the book about some of my friendships with people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Katie Hill, because I think at times you do need to listen to one another and acknowledge there may be many things you disagree on, but if there's some things you can agree on, then you ought to put those at the front of the list.
Yeah, in fact, Congressman, in a minute, I want to ask you about AOC, Katie Hill, because you cover them both in your book really well. Are you a natural-born politician? I know your dad was a terrific politician. Are you a natural-born politician who's figured out how to achieve celebrity status in this social media age? Or maybe it's the converse, you're a natural born, you're like Ronald Reagan, you're like a great actor who's figured out how to make it work in politics.
Well, I started in the state legislature. I write about being an idealistic 26-year-old who thought that I could contribute to a new generation of Republican leadership in the state of Florida. I got the chance to serve in a number of capacities there. And so I think my first passion is policy, ensuring that we actually put the policies in place that can lift up all Americans. And I do believe that you have to animate those policies with a certain panache, with a certain showmanship. They convince members of Congress to, in the middle of the night, go to the floor and give these roaring ovations to empty rooms. Normal people would think that that would be a sign of mental illness, but that's actually how we tell people to move up in Congress. Rather than speaking to an empty room, I think you've got to be able to go out and be on television, on the radio, on the internet, sharing a passionate vision to include people and invite people to a movement. And that's what I think I've done with Firebrand and what I've tried to do with my service.
I wonder, do you think, is there like a Matt Gaetz formula for how much a minute of earned media equates to in terms of value of advertising? Because it seems like you have figured that out.
Well, no, there are a number of those algorithms that try to break it down. For me, ubiquity is the objective. I want to contribute to the discussion and the debate. I come from a district, I write about my deep connection to people who've served in our military, and there's a certain fighting spirit that comes with a military district, a veteran district. And while I never went down range to hear any shots fired in anger with a uniform on, I do believe that same sense of patriotism can convert to debates that you have in committee rooms or in the floor of the Congress, or even with hostile television hosts at times. I write about the decision I've made not just to appear with friendly interviewers, but to go on The View or to go on CNN or MSNBC, where they might not hold my politics near and dear to their hearts. But I think that it's the sign of a healthy democracy to show that we can actually have those disagreements and that they can be interesting and they can tell a lot about where we're trying to bring the country. So I told my friend Congressman Lee Zeldin, you got to win all your home games and go 50-50 on the road. That acknowledges that at times when you do put yourself out there, you can sometimes come away from some of those rhetorical battles a bit scarred, but I actually think America is all the better for it if we engage in that robust debate.
Got it. Would you go so far as to say that in Congress today, seniority is really, it's not the currency of power. It well, in this social media age, could be, in some part, fame is what drives power in this modern media age. Is that, would you agree?
I would agree. And I think that creates opportunity, because you see, when you say that the people that get to run the place are simply those who have been around the longest, then it creates a hazard, because a lot of the ambitious people that want to do something else leave. And so the ones that have been around for 20, 25, 30 years are the ones for whom Congress is sort of the best they'll ever do and the most excitement they'll ever have. And it retards the type of innovation and creativity that I think our country needs to meet these big new challenges. And, I write that, only a fool would expect an institution chocked of octogenarians and septuagenarians to go and solve the major challenges that will impact the new generation of Americans. And I'm encouraged by young people wanting to serve, whether they're on the right or the left. And I think that we actually have the most socially interconnected generation in all of human history, and millennials coming into more political power. And we should view that as a great opportunity to actually work together, because look, if we have an environment that is filthy, that will affect us all equally. If we have a country that is forever engaged in unfocused forever wars, that drains the soul of a nation across any ideological or political spectrum. And I think that sense of common destiny can create unity, even in a dynamic like you described, where at times confrontation can lead to that type of virility and that type of online attention and fame. Yeah.
How has your book gone over with your colleagues in Congress, or do you not really care? I mean, it seems like we'll go back to Newt's days, the kind of the frankness that you've had the courage to show. It might spell trouble for a young member, but I get the sense it's not the case anymore.
Well, I didn't really start with many friends in Congress, so I haven't missed many that I've lost. When you write a book about Congress and chapter 1 is called Sex and Money, you can get the attention of a few of your colleagues, as some have had challenges with both. Not that either should be in any way, discriminated against. I think a plethora of both should be enjoyed, but no one should sell their country out for either, and far too many do in Washington. And so I don't mind checking Republicans when they do the wrong thing. I write in the book about Senator Richard Burr, someone who I think made a really bad mistake when choosing his own personal benefit and his own stock portfolio and wealth over candor and truth with the American people. And so, I will defend Democrats like Katie Hill and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez if I think they're being treated unfairly. And I will attack Republicans if I think that they are engaged in misdeeds or if they're deviating from what we ought to do for America. And I think that we need more of that in politics. We need more of an ability to recognize that we aren't two separate teams wearing different jerseys. We're all wearing the American jersey, and we can have different ideas about what plays to run. But at the end of the day, we all got to get the country in the end zone.
I know you're relatively on opposite ends of the political spectrum from AOC, for example, who you write about. But is it fair to say that you both have kind of read the same playbook? You've got similar operating styles, and she's just as effective on the left with the style as you are on the right.
And not only do I recognize AOC's star power, I write about how the president does as well. You see, remember, Donald Trump is a man who quite literally judged his own talent competitions. He knows a star when he sees one, and he knows AOC is a star, which is sort of why he engages with her at times. I know that she's a socialist, but I also know she's not a sellout. And I think that there are far too many in Washington in both parties who actually believe in nothing. They're just vessels through which special interests operate. And if someone is sincere in their beliefs, even if they're not my beliefs, I can usually find a way to work with someone on a policy issue that will help people. AOC and I have worked together on veteran legislation, research to help veterans deal with PTSD. And similarly, I think there are people in my own party that I have a very hard time supporting because they're more interested in being a valet for a special interest or a PAC or an industry group than they are representing the values that they campaigned on before their constituents.
Yeah, yeah. I was worked on Capitol Hill the entire Reagan years, and there was there's a quote in your book. I want to read it for you. You say, "I hope to represent them," meaning your constituents, "at their best, but I also represent them at their worst, and I beg their forgiveness when I am at mine." And it reminded me of a conclusion I came to after years on the Hill, and that was, Congress, it is actually a perfect reflection of American society, right? You have crooks or drug addicts or thieves, and then you have brilliant leaders and humanitarians. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I don't hold myself out before my constituents or the country as a perfect man. I'm a flawed man. And I think that when we all recognize that, we become a little more accepting of one another and we're able to listen to each other a little more. We used to believe that politicians had to have the perfect family, the perfect background, no scars or scrubs on their record. And now we have Donald Trump as president of the United States, someone who I think would acknowledge that throughout his life, there are times when he's probably fallen short of his own standard. We all do, right? And I think that when we get rid of that pretense, it allows us to be more real, more representative, more visceral, and more connected to our constituents. And so, yes, the Florida man is a meme. There are people in Florida who at times do interesting and strange and weird stuff. A similar line in the book, I acknowledge that George Herbert Walker Bush said he's a quiet man and hears the quiet voices in the country. Well, maybe I'm a bit of a strange man and I can hear the strange voices of the country, but that's okay because at times it's the odd, the weird, the interesting among us who can do exceptional things. And I think we can celebrate that and be a little more gracious to one another about our personal shortfalls, recognizing that we all have something to contribute to America's destiny. Yeah,
well put, well put. Let's go back to Katie Hill for a moment because you focus to some extent on the book. And I was interested in that whole story because she was our congresswoman. She represented Simi Valley, where the Ronald Reagan Library is. And she seemed to me to be like a talented and tough operator. And I wonder if, in your mind, she's not the kind, in my mind, to have just folded up her tent when things got tough. So did she, have to hit the road because of Democrat, the leadership and Speaker Pelosi were concerned? Or do you think she really came to that conclusion that it was best as an individual to head home?
And of course, yes, Katie Hill's circumstance, her husband releases private photos that they had taken that were deeply embarrassing, and she did resign from Congress. I encouraged her not to. I said, Katie, acknowledge the fact that you took some photos that maybe you shouldn't have, but that you're there to put the people first and do that. And what she said is that each and every day she was riddled with anxiety over what next photo or next admission might come out of that former relationship. And what surprised me so much, John, is that of all of the women in the United States Congress, there wasn't one who stepped up to defend her initially. The sisterhood of the traveling pantsuit wasn't there for one of their own, even though they were quite willing to demonize the president for his own misdeeds that they had perceived. And so I just thought that it was a human thing to do, to be there for my coworker who was being attacked. And really the surprise in the Katie Hill endeavor wasn't her actions as much as it was the unwillingness, particularly of her female colleagues, to have her back.
Well, do you think, you're on the leading edge of millennials that entered Congress. Do you see the attitudes of changing on Capitol Hill as time goes by and there's less of, what you just described?
I will definitely say that the younger members of Congress are more connected to one another than the older members of Congress are. And I think that at times an environment that doesn't embrace term limits allow these long-standing grudges to paralyze progress in our country. You can get a few of these old bulls who somebody said something to somebody 12 years ago, and now they won't work together on legislation or budgeting or appropriations. And I think with younger people, there's a willingness to say, well, we grew up sharing, every weird Halloween costume we were in, every instant hot take we had on someone else's social media post. And then there's kind of an ability to come back together and reformulate the human bonds that are important to all of us. And so I do think we can tackle some of those challenges. And I actually think that the challenges we have to face are very different for my generation. I don't think that the baby boomer generation quite had to tackle the omnipresence of digital platforms in the way that we will have to tackle them, and how that impacts people's lives. And the debate about climate change, in my mind, should be over as it relates to whether or not it's occurring, because my generation is dealing with the reality of a changing climate and how that impacts people. And so I think that we can get past some of the old dogmas and move forward in progress that is, I think, very utilitarian in its impact on the country.
Sure. You have a chapter, it's called Two Parties, One Scam. You cover a lot of issues in there, but what I wonder is, from a Republican perspective, are there any Republicans left in the House or the Senate that give a damn about the federal deficit? Because it just seems like the Republicans have lost their way on spending, I'm startled, having served in the Reagan administration like that, and to see no one really focusing on that. There's no distinguishing between the two parties on spending anymore, it seems. So am I wrong?
You're not. Our friend Rand Paul has a great saying: when the Democrats are in power, the Republicans are the conservative party. And when the Republicans are in power, there is no conservative party. Because oftentimes the things we campaign on become inconvenient when people are trying to govern. And I think that, frankly, is because of the influence that special interests have. Look, there is not a strong special interest presence in Washington, D.C. to reduce spending. All of them can agree to increase spending, because then the pie is bigger for them to all get their snouts down into. And I would say, there's not really a big special interest effort against forever wars, because these forever wars create slush fund opportunities for spending with very little accountability. And there's not a big special interest push to limit illegal immigration, because Democrats see the benefit of illegal immigration in terms of political power for them. And a lot of big businesses who support Republicans view illegal immigration as an opportunity for them to keep wages down for Americans. So on a number of these issues, it's not really Republicans against Democrats. It's the uniparty. It's the establishment that both Republicans and Democrats are willing to adhere to, so that the worst elements of Washington, the elements that would impoverish our towns with bad trade deals, that would spill the blood of our bravest patriots without a clear understanding of what victory looks like, and an establishment that I think would fundamentally change America with unchecked illegal immigration. And that's a lot to fight against as a part of the populist right in Washington.
Yeah. You just mentioned it, the endless wars. I have to say, Congressman, of all the chapters in the book, man, that one pulled at the heartstrings. It just felt to me like in your gut, there's nothing more important than that. And I wonder, are there therefore like Matt Gaetz rules on when you should go to war versus when you shouldn't?
Yeah, I think that we have been trading the same villages back and forth in Afghanistan for 19 years at great cost to our country, to our people. And again, like I would say to our bravest patriots, there absolutely are times when we have to go fight, when the fight is just and necessary. It's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful President Reagan enshrined in Republican ideology the notion of having a big, strong, capable military ready to vanquish any foe when necessary. I worry about sort of the permanent police state that has become far too acceptable to the establishment of Washington. I think President Trump knows how to deal with a bully. You punch him in the nose and you give him, a real question before they would mess with you again. And he's done that in Syria by taking out Soleimani, by taking out al-Baghdadi, by taking out the leader of al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula. What you don't do with a bully is try to move into their home for 20 years with the hopes of realigning their worldview. And I think that's what, the Obama, Bush failed doctrines in the Middle East have led to.
We have a few more minutes. I want to turn to the elections. They're kind of on everybody's mind, and yours as well, I've no doubt. In some respects, Congressman, do you see this upcoming election? It's going to be a test of President Trump's social media capability and strength, and his ability to just reach out and touch individual Americans versus the mainstream media, which is just unified and against him.
I do, but I also see it part of a political realignment that was really initially ignited by President Reagan. When President Reagan ran, he believed that the Republican Party could get bigger by attracting disaffected Democrats, independents, and that there would be a new coalition in America that would be a deeply patriotic one and one that would assuredly win against the Soviet threat. In America now, I think President Trump is leading that next great realignment, where we will not invade everywhere, invite everyone across our border illegally, and impoverish every town in our country with bad trade deals. And so I think that in a way, this election represents how the political geographic map is changing, how the ideological spectrum is changing, and how some of the core principles of the parties, I think, are different now than in sort of the neo-libertarian days of the Republican Party that followed after President Reagan.
I bet you believe that President Trump's going to win this upcoming election. But let me paint a world for you. Even if he wins 4 years from now, he'll be off on his way to do something else. Will that be the same for you, or will Matt Gaetz be a different kind of congressman without a President Trump?
I can't imagine serving in any world where President Trump wasn't there to create this new path for a firebrand spirit to infect the Congress and to try to bring ideas forward that will help our countrymen and countrywomen. So I do view my service as somewhat fused to his, but the America First movement has to live beyond the presidency of Donald Trump, whether that's now or whether, as I believe will be the case, will be after he's reelected and serves an additional 4 years. And in doing so, I think it has to be about more than just the man or President Trump's charisma. It has to be about these ideas and how we will take an America First ideology and apply that to fix our environment, to confront China, to have a right-sized foreign policy, and to ensure that we rescue the American economy with rising wages for generations to come. The America First movement will be a failure if it passes with Donald Trump's passing presidency. I do think that there are people who are in politics, and maybe some who will enter politics, who see this as something that is deeply enduring, and I count myself among that group.
Yeah. This recent revelation with respect to Hunter Biden's laptop and all the rest of that, do you get the sense that what's going to happen here is the mainstream media, it doesn't matter, we could have films, footage, evidence, checks, they're going to ignore this story no matter what? Is that what you think?
Well, it is a problem in America when media companies and digital platforms don't want to present facts and allow the country to analyze and come up with their own conclusions. They want to be the judge, jury, and executioner on arbitrating the truth. And that's problematic for us. I do believe the media should focus more on these international corruption issues. But at the end of the day, I think voting is actually a bit of a selfish activity. I think when most people go into the voting booth, they look at the candidates and say, who's going to fight for me? What will make my life better? And I think if the president in the closing days of the election focuses on the ways in which Americans saw rising wages, more capital investment at the businesses where they worked, more plans for expansion and growth and opportunity, he will win over those undecideds who disproportionately broke for him in the 2016 election. I think in 2016, folks saw Hillary Clinton as a defender of a corrupt status quo. And Donald Trump, whether they liked him or didn't like him, they saw as something very different, a disruptor to the status quo. I think as this election plays out, you see a similar dynamic. Joe Biden, someone who's been in the Washington scene for 47 years. Donald Trump, still somebody working to change the way that town works. And I hope that if President Trump is reelected, we won't spend 3 years trying to delegitimize him or his victory, that instead we'll actually work on issues where I do think we have common cause with people across the political spectrum on confronting China, realigning trade, doing infrastructure for our people and for our country. Those things could unite even a divided government. And if we get rid of the cancel culture and the desire to delegitimize our president, just maybe we could animate these policies for the benefit of our country.
Yeah. Speaking of China, you covered in your book, if Trump were not reelected, is China just going to crush us because we're going to go back to the ways pre-Donald Trump?
Well, both parties have sold the American people on this notion of a chimerica dream. But the chimerica dream is actually a nightmare. As we've drawn China closer to us, they haven't become more like us. We've become more vulnerable, and they have preyed on us more. They've preyed on us by stealing our intellectual property, by, I think, lying to the world about their intentions in the South China Sea and constraining shipping lanes, and the way they try to dominate their region in a really repressive way. And so I think we have to see China with clear eyes. And if we stopped trying to build democracies out of blood and sand and Arab militias in the Middle East, we would see that China is building skyscrapers and cities and aircraft carriers. And again, a very Reagan approach here is needed. We have to see China as the type of a threat that could try to replace America in a unipolar world that they control. Reagan saw how damaging that would be to our country if the Soviet Union prevailed with that competing worldview. And I think the way to compete is to stand up and see them not as the friendly workplace, challenger they are, but as truly an entity that would make the world a less safe and less hospitable place.
Yeah. Do you see yourself as a firebrand at age 58, as you are at age 38?
I'm hoping to make it to 58. I'm 38 now, and I think that it is an exciting time in our country with a president who challenges assumptions and wants to do things differently. And at the same time, we have Donald Trump in the White House. We have a media landscape that does have a bias toward the interesting. I think they have a bias toward the political left, but they're also biased toward those who are able to talk about policies and moments and investigations in a way that bring people in and tell the story effectively. And in my 4 years in Congress, that's what I've tried to do. Tell the American people what's really happening. I was the first member of Congress to call for the termination of Robert Mueller. Now we sort of see how that turned out. I was, one of the first to defend the president in the Ukraine impeachment. I think I've got a pretty good record telling the truth, calling these scandals what they are, and defending a president who's been both innocent and I think very helpful to the American people in terms of the policies that he's implemented. Well,
let me say in closing, Congressman, this is such a refreshingly honest, straightforward tale. And I hope 40 years from now, whether President Trump were reelected or not, you write the next book so we can continue to follow the journey of a guy with a lot of courage and heart and, really who I hope succeeds in the future.
Well, thank you. And if we're doing this in 4 years, let it not be over a Zoom call. Let us enjoy the wonders and great beauty of the Reagan Library. And thank you for what you do to preserve what I think was the last great transformational presidency, one that I think inspired so many Americans, that continues to inspire so many Americans. And I think the more we sort of learn about the connectivity between this Reagan movement and this Trump movement, I think the more we may learn about how politics on the right can be at its most successful self.
Well, we look forward to seeing you out here, Congressman. You're welcome anytime.
Thank you, John.
Take care.
We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
And let me offer lesson number one about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.